Erebor was humanity's distant bastion, a colony perched high in the mountains of an unforgiving world. It was a place where the wind howled through the jagged cliffs and snow never melted, even in the heat of summer. Yet humanity thrived here. The city's architecture mimicked the nests of eagles, fortresses built into the rocky peaks that overlooked vast, empty plains below. The people were resilient, much like the birds that inspired their designs, living in harmony with the planet's harsh conditions. Captain Alaric Voss, known to his people as the Eagle, stood at the edge of the fortress balcony, gazing down on the thriving colony below. The wind whipped through his graying hair as he admired the view. For decades, the colony had prospered under his leadership. The distant sky shimmered a soft red, the twin suns beginning to set, and in that moment, peace seemed eternal. "Captain, the security perimeter is quiet," Lieutenant Mara Solis reported, stepping onto the balcony beside him. She had served with Alaric for years, her loyalty unwavering. There was a fire in her eyes, much like the captain's own, though she was far younger. "Good," Alaric nodded. "Let's hope it stays that way." But deep down, Alaric felt uneasy. Erebor had enjoyed years of peace since the last Great War, but peace in the galaxy was fragile. They were on the edge of human-controlled space, and the Xylathians, an ancient, reptilian species, had been a lingering threat ever since their last skirmish with humanity. His instincts were proven right just as night fell. The alarms blared across the colony, piercing the peaceful evening like a dagger. Alaric's communicator buzzed with frantic voices, shouting over one another about an incoming fleet. His chest tightened as the reports confirmed the worst. The Xylathians had returned. "They're here," Alaric whispered, his voice grave. From the mountainside, Alaric and Mara watched the sky as black shapes appeared on the horizon, blotting out the stars. The Xylathians had come with an armada, their massive ships descending like storm clouds over the settlement. Without warning, the first blast struck the city. Fire and debris erupted from the ground as the Xylathians bombarded Erebor with merciless precision. "Get everyone to the bunkers," Alaric barked, snapping into action. Mara was already ahead of him, issuing orders to the defense forces. People screamed as the ground trembled beneath the onslaught. Buildings crumbled, and the once majestic colony was reduced to ruins in a matter of moments. The enemy's firepower was overwhelming, more advanced than anything humanity had seen from them before. Alaric sprinted to the command center, his mind racing. He had fought the Xylathians before, during humanity's earlier wars, but nothing had prepared him for this level of devastation. His hands shook as he activated the comm system. "This is Captain Alaric Voss, issuing a distress call to all nearby human colonies." He spoke into the console, his voice firm. "Erebor is under attack. We need immediate assistance. Repeat, Erebor is under attack." He knew help would be days away, if it came at all. The colony was isolated, too far from the core worlds to expect quick reinforcements. For now, they were on their own. Mara appeared beside him, her face streaked with sweat and soot. "We've got civilians in the bunkers, but the defense grid is failing. We can't hold them off." Alaric clenched his jaw. He had known this day might come, but it was worse than he'd imagined. "We'll fall back to the mountains. Regroup. Fight from there." Mara hesitated for a second, but then nodded, trusting his judgment. Alaric's reputation as the Eagle wasn't just about tactical brilliance, it was his ability to lead when all seemed lost. He would need every ounce of that skill now. "Get the soldiers. We retreat to the mountains," Alaric ordered. The retreat was chaos. Xylathian dropships landed in the heart of the city, deploying their cold-blooded warriors onto the streets. Alaric's forces, outgunned and outnumbered, fought a desperate rearguard action as the last of the civilians were evacuated. Mara led a small strike team, planting explosives to slow the enemy's advance, but it was a losing battle. As they ascended into the mountains, Alaric paused for a moment, looking back at the ruins of his city. Flames illuminated the night, and the once proud fortress, the nest of humanity's survival, lay in smoldering ruins. But he wasn't beaten yet. Not while there was still breath in his lungs. His soldiers, scattered and demoralized, looked to him for hope. "The nest may have fallen," Alaric muttered to himself, "but the eagle will rise again." With that, he turned toward the mountains, where a new fight would begin. The mountains of Erebor were cold and unforgiving, much like the battle that raged within Captain Alaric Voss's heart. His once thriving colony now lay in ruins, and the survivors, those few who had escaped the Xylathian onslaught, had retreated to the jagged cliffs, hiding among the rocks like prey hunted by a predator. Alaric and his forces had set up a hidden base in the mountains, camouflaged within the cliffs. The wind howled through the narrow passes, and snow drifted endlessly around them. Supplies were scarce, morale even more so. The Xylathians were relentless, their patrols sweeping the foothills, searching for any sign of human resistance. But Alaric knew their enemy would not climb the mountains, not until they thought it was worth the effort. Lieutenant Mara Solis, her face pale but her resolve firm, stood beside Alaric as they scouted the enemy from afar. She, like the others, had suffered through the retreat, but her loyalty never wavered. Alaric admired her grit. "We've struck 2 of their outposts, but they seem to be growing stronger," Mara said, her voice low. "We're losing men every time we hit them." Alaric nodded grimly. His forces were few, and the guerrilla tactics they employed were starting to take their toll. Each raid on the Xylathians had yielded minimal supplies but heavy losses. The enemy's technology was far more advanced, and their numbers seemed endless. Alaric's soldiers were brave, but bravery alone couldn't win this war. "We need to slow them down, weaken their supply lines," Alaric replied. His voice was measured, but Mara could hear the frustration beneath it. "If we keep moving, keep them guessing, we can outlast them." "They'll eventually find us," Mara warned. "The mountains can't hide us forever." Alaric's jaw tightened. "Then we'll be ready when they do." In the days that followed, Alaric organized his forces into smaller units, launching hit-and-run attacks on Xylathian patrols. Mara led a group to plant explosives along the alien supply routes, a dangerous mission deep within enemy territory. They managed to destroy a key convoy, but at a great cost. Several soldiers never returned, and Mara herself was wounded during the retreat. Back at the mountain base, Alaric faced the grim reality of their situation. Supplies were running low, and every victory felt fleeting. The Xylathians were adapting to their tactics, becoming harder to ambush. Alaric felt the weight of each decision pressing down on him like the snow that covered the peaks around them. Standing on a cliff, Alaric watched the valley below, where the fires of Xylathian camps burned brightly in the distance. The enemy was relentless, always advancing, always one step closer to crushing what remained of the colony. He felt like his wings had been clipped, grounded in a war they could not win. But there was no surrender in him yet. Captain Alaric Voss crouched in the shadows of the mountain ridge, his eyes locked on the Xylathian command center below. The alien facility was heavily fortified, guarded by towering soldiers and advanced weaponry. Yet, Alaric had discovered a critical weakness, a single communication relay that controlled the enemy's ground forces. If they could disable it, the Xylathians would be thrown into chaos. This was their chance to turn the tide, but it was a high-risk plan. They called it Talon's Strike, a final, desperate gambit to sever the enemy's command structure and cripple their operations. Alaric's heart pounded as he scanned the cliffs, where his small team of guerrilla fighters, led by Lieutenant Mara Solis, prepared for the assault. Mara, despite her injury from the last raid, had insisted on leading the infiltration. Alaric knew she was the best choice. Her expertise in stealth and explosives would be key to their success. As she made her way silently toward the relay, Alaric signaled the rest of the team to move into position. Every step was calculated, every breath measured. There could be no mistakes. "We plant the charges and get out," Alaric had told them before the mission. "The moment that relay goes down, the Xylathians will scramble, and that's when we hit them." Now, in the freezing darkness, his team moved with precision, slipping through the gaps in the Xylathian patrols like shadows. Mara and Sergeant Elias Green reached the base of the relay, expertly attaching the explosives to its support beams. The tension in the air was thick as Alaric watched them, knowing that any slip-up would mean death. Then, just as they were about to retreat, the alarms blared. Xylathian soldiers appeared from the shadows, their heavy footfalls rumbling through the ground. The humans had been spotted. Alaric's instincts kicked in, and he raised his rifle, opening fire to cover Mara and Elias. The rest of the team joined in, the mountainside erupting in a fierce firefight.
Go!
Get to the fallback point. Alaric shouted over the comms, his voice cutting through the chaos. Elias covered Mara as she fled toward the ridge, but a blast from an enemy plasma rifle struck him in the back. He stumbled, blood seeping through his armor, but he managed to detonate the charges before collapsing. The explosion rocked the valley, and the Xylathian relay toppled, sparks flying as the enemy's communication system failed. The mission was a success, but it had come at a cost. Alaric's heart sank as he watched Elias fall, his sacrifice buying them the time they needed to escape. The Xylathian forces below were in disarray, their coordination shattered. As Alaric and Mara regrouped in the mountains, the weight of their losses hung heavy in the cold night air. The eagle's talons had struck, but the fight was far from over. The enemy was crippled, but not defeated. Alaric knew the final battle was coming. The final battle for Erebor began at dawn, the sky streaked with red as the twin suns rose over the shattered landscape. Alaric Voss stood at the edge of a rocky outcrop, overlooking the valley where the Xylathian forces regrouped after their devastating loss of communication. Their movements were disjointed, their forces uncoordinated without the relay, but they still outnumbered the human resistance. Behind Alaric, what remained of his troops readied for a last stand. They were tired, battered, and few in number, but there was a fire in their eyes. The successful Talon strike had bought them time, but now it would come down to this. One final stand to protect their world. Captain, they're preparing for a full assault, Lieutenant Mara Solis reported, her voice steady despite the exhaustion that lined her face. Her wound from the earlier raid had been hastily treated, but she refused to stand down. She would fight until the end, just like the rest of them. Alaric nodded. Then we make our stand here. If we can hold them off until the reinforcements arrive, we'll have a chance. The Xylathians, still reeling from the loss of their command structure, were in disarray. But they were not giving up. General Xrak, the ruthless alien leader, personally led the charge, determined to crush the human resistance once and for all. The ground trembled as the enemy approached, their towering figures casting long shadows over the valley. Alaric's eyes narrowed. They want us to break. We won't. With a single motion, he signaled his soldiers to take their positions. The humans had the advantage of the terrain. Their guerrilla tactics, honed in the mountains, would be their only hope against the superior firepower and numbers of the Xylathians. Every outcrop, every hidden pass, had been turned into a defensive position. Traps were laid, and snipers were hidden among the cliffs. The first wave of Xylathian soldiers crashed into their defenses, and the mountains erupted in gunfire and explosions. Alaric led from the front, his rifle precise, his commands sharp. Mara and the others fought with a ferocity that only the desperate can muster, using the terrain to their advantage, luring the aliens into narrow passages where explosives awaited. But even as they held their ground, Alaric knew it was only a matter of time before the sheer weight of the Xylathian forces overwhelmed them. His eyes locked onto General Xrak, standing at the center of the battlefield, coordinating his forces. The Xylathian leader was massive, his armor glinting in the rising sun. "Cover me," Alaric growled to Mara as he broke from the defensive line, heading straight towards Xrak. Amidst the chaos, Alaric charged. His movements were swift, each step fueled by the determination of a man who had nothing left to lose. Xrak saw him coming and met him head-on. The two clashed in a violent melee, Xrak's strength overpowering, but Alaric's experience and agility kept him in the fight. With a final, well-placed strike, Alaric drove his blade into Xrak's exposed side. The alien general collapsed, his forces thrown into complete disarray. The Xylathians faltered, retreating as reinforcements from human colonies finally arrived on the horizon. Erebor had survived. As the sun fully rose, Alaric stood tall amidst the ruins, bloodied but unbroken. The eagle had risen once again,